All right, so you're ready to really dig into some cool systems for changing behavior, huh?
We're talking practical strategies, not just theory, stuff you can use in your own life.
Whether it's for yourself, your kids, or even your team at work.
We're diving deep into token economies, group contingencies, and contingency contracts.
And these aren't just like random ideas someone came up with, right?
Not at all. They're backed by a ton of research and have been used successfully for decades.
Okay, so let's start with token economies.
Probably the most recognizable one.
Yeah, I feel like most people have at least heard of it, even if they don't fully get it.
Right, and the name can be a bit misleading.
Makes you think of Chuck E. Cheese and those prize tickets.
Exactly, but it's way more sophisticated than that. It's really a system of positive reinforcement.
So instead of just like hoping for the best, you're giving people concrete ways to earn rewards for positive behavior.
Precisely. Think of it like earning points on a loyalty card. You get rewarded for your purchases.
Okay, so instead of free coffee, it's like extra screen time.
Yeah.
Or getting to choose what's for dinner.
Exactly. You tailor the rewards to what motivates the individual, and that's one of the things that makes it so effective.
It's not one size fits all. It's about finding what works for each person.
Absolutely. Remember that study where they found that using a child's favorite toys as tokens actually led to big improvements?
Wait, really? So instead of those generic star stickers, you could use like a kid's obsession with dinosaurs to your advantage.
Exactly. It's about tapping into their intrinsic motivation.
And that's way more powerful than just trying to force them into something.
You got it. It's all about positive reinforcement.
Love it. Okay, so we've got our tokens, we've got our rewards. What's next?
We've got to set up the system.
Right. Like, how many tokens does it take to earn each reward?
That's the exchange rate, and it's important to get that right. Too easy, and the rewards lose their value.
Too hard, and people just give up, right?
Exactly, and we don't want that. Then you've got to make sure everyone understands the rules.
Right, because if the goal is to encourage positive behavior, the last thing you want is for people to get frustrated because they don't understand how the system works.
Exactly. It's all about setting clear expectations from the get-go.
So it's like, lay down the law, but make it fun.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to get creative.
The more engaging you can make it, the more successful it'll be, right?
100%. Now, speaking of engaging, let's talk about a really cool twist on token economies level systems.
Ooh, level systems. Like in video games.
Precisely. Think about it. You start at one level and work your way up by completing tasks.
And each level comes with its own set of perks and privileges. It's like a classic example of a classroom behavior chart.
Exactly. You could have different levels, bronze, silver, gold, and each level comes with increasingly desirable rewards.
I love that. It taps into that desire for progress and achievement, which can be super motivating.
Exactly. And it's not just about the rewards, it's also about the recognition and the sense of accomplishment that comes with leveling up.
Okay, so how do we actually design an effective token economy or level system? What are the steps?
Well, grab a pen and paper because we're about to break it down.
Okay, step one.
Identify those target behaviors. What exactly do you want to see more of?
So, like, if you're a teacher, you might target behaviors like completing homework on time, participating in class discussions, or maybe working collaboratively with others.
Exactly. Get specific. What about at home?
Well, it could be things like chores, practicing an instrument, or even just being kind to siblings.
You've got it. Now, once you've identified those behaviors, it's time to choose your tokens.
And this is where you can have some fun, but I'm guessing durability is key, especially if you're dealing with younger kids.
Oh, absolutely. You don't want those tokens disintegrating after a day.
So stickers, points, maybe even those little erasers that kids love.
Those are great examples. And the key is to choose something that's appealing to the individuals involved.
Right, because a sticker chart might work wonders for a 5-year-old, but a teenager might need something a little more, shall we say, cool.
You said it. And this ties into our next step, creating your reward menu.
Ooh, the reward menu. This is where you get to be creative and really tap into what motivates people.
It's all about finding those things that are going to get people excited and make them want to earn those tokens. And remember, what motivates one person might not do a thing for someone else. So individualization is key.
Totally. One person's treasure is another person's trash.
Exactly. Now, while you're brainstorming those amazing rewards, don't forget about setting clear exchange rates.
Right, because we've got to know how many tokens it takes to purchase each reward.
And this is where you might need to do a bit of fine-tuning.
Yeah, you don't want it to be too easy or too hard to earn those rewards.
And don't forget about those ground rules.
Oh, right, the nitty-gritty details.
Exactly. When can tokens be earned? When can they be exchanged? What happens if someone breaks the rules? Being upfront about all of this can save a lot of headaches later on.
It's all about setting those expectations early on.
And finally, before you unleash your fully fledged token economy on the world, consider running a pilot test.
Like a test drive.
Exactly. See how things go, work out any kinks, and then
Full speed ahead.
you got it.
Now, I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but what happens when someone tries to game the system?
Ah, yes, the rule benders and the system testers.
Or maybe they just refuse to participate altogether.
Those are great questions, and it's something to be prepared for. Well, the good news is that most of those challenges can be addressed with a bit of planning and flexibility.
So, like, what's the best way to handle someone who's constantly trying to bend the rules?
Consistency is key. Just like a referee in a game, you've got to call those fouls when you see them.
You don't want to play favorites or let things slide.
Exactly, because that can undermine the whole system.
And then what about the folks who are just like, I'm good?
The token economy resistors.
Yeah, the ones who are just not into it. What do you do then?
Well, that's a sign that you might need to go back to the drawing board and really think about what motivates that individual.
Because one person's reward is another person's punishment.
Right, 100%. What gets one person excited might be a total snooze fest for someone else.
So if kids not motivated by extra screen time, maybe it's about finding something else they're really into, like a special outing or a new book.
Exactly. It's all about individualizing those rewards.
Okay, so we've covered the rule benders, the resistors.
Yeah.
Anything else we should be prepared for?
Oh, yeah, the fade out.
The fade out. Sounds ominous.
It's not as bad as it sounds. It's just about how you eventually phase out the token economy without everyone reverting back to their old habits.
Okay, so it's not like ripping off a Band-Aid. It's more like, what, slowly letting the air out of a balloon.
Exactly. You're gradually reducing the frequency of the rewards and shifting the focus to those intrinsic motivators.
So instead of relying on external rewards, it becomes more about that internal sense of accomplishment.
Precisely. Think about it. You don't need a gold star every time you tie your shoes, right?
Okay, that's a good point.
It becomes second nature.
So it's like we're using these systems as a bridge to help people develop those positive habits and those internal motivators.
Exactly. And that's really the ultimate goal, right?
Love it. Okay, so we've covered token economies, but what about those times when you're trying to change the behavior of a whole group?
Ah, you're ready to dive into the world of group contingencies?
Let's do it.
All right then, buckle up.
This is where things get really interesting, right? Because now we're not just talking about individual behavior, we're talking about the dynamics of a whole group.
It's like that old saying, teamwork makes the dream work. But in this case, it's more like teamwork can actually change behavior.
And hopefully for the better, right?
Exactly. Although, as with any of these systems, there's always the potential for things to go a bit sideways if they're not implemented thoughtfully.
Okay, so let's break it down. What exactly do we mean by group contingencies?
In the simplest terms, it means that a single consequence, which is usually, but not always, a reward, is linked to the behavior of the entire group, or at least a specific part of the group.
Okay, so instead of if you finish your veggies, you can have dessert, it's more like if everyone helps clean up the playroom, we can all go for ice cream.
You got it. And just like with token economies, there are a few different ways to structure group contingencies, each with its own pros and cons.
Okay, so walk me through the options. What are the different types of group contingencies?
Well, you've got independent group contingencies, dependent group contingencies, and interdependent group contingencies.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with independent. What's that all about?
Independent group contingencies are all about individual accountability within the group. So everyone in the group is eligible for the reward, but whether or not they get it depends solely on their own behavior, not on what anyone else is doing.
So it's kind of like a group of runners all aiming for a personal best. They're all in it together, but ultimately their success depends on their own individual effort.
Exactly. And this can be a really effective approach when you want to encourage individual effort while still fostering a sense of teamwork.
Makes sense. Okay, so what about dependent group contingencies? How are those different?
Dependent group contingencies are where things get a bit more, shall we say, interesting. In this scenario, the reward for the whole group hinges on the performance of one individual or a smaller subset within the group.
Okay, so the pressure's on. I can see how that could be incredibly motivating, but it also seems like it could backfire if not handled carefully.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to make sure that the individual or smaller group doesn't feel like they're being singled out or set up for failure.
And you want to be super careful about potential bullying or resentment from other group members, right?
100%. Communication and sensitivity are key with this type of contingency. But when used thoughtfully, it can be a powerful tool for positive change.
Okay, so we've covered independent and dependent. What's left? Interdependent, right?
Yeah, you got it. Interdependent group contingencies are all about, you guessed it, interdependence. In this model, the group only achieves the reward if everyone, and I mean everyone, meets the predetermined criteria.
Okay, so it's the ultimate we're all in this together approach.
Yeah.
No one gets left behind, and no one succeeds unless everyone succeeds.
Precisely. And this can be a super effective way to foster collaboration, teamwork, and a sense of shared responsibility.
I love that. It's like the opposite of that every man for himself mentality. Okay, so those are the three main types of group contingencies. But how do you actually put this into practice? Like, what are some real-world examples of this stuff in action?
Well, one classic example of an interdependent group contingency is the good behavior game. It's been used successfully in classrooms for decades.
The good behavior game. That sounds kind of fun. Tell me more.
Basically, the teacher divides the class into teams and sets clear expectations for behavior. Throughout the day, the teams earn points for following the rules and lose points for any infractions. At the end of the day or week, the team with the most points earns a special reward.
Okay, so it's like a giant game of who can be the best. But instead of competing against each other, they're all working together towards a common goal.
Exactly. And the research on the good behavior game is pretty impressive. Not only does it lead to significant reductions in disruptive behavior, but studies have shown that it can even have long-term positive impacts on social skills and academic achievement.
Wow, so this simple game can actually change kids' lives. That's amazing. And it makes you wonder if this approach could be applied to other areas of life, like workplaces or even society as a whole.
It's definitely something to think about, isn't it? Like, what if we could use the principles of the good behavior game to promote cooperation and reduce conflict on a larger scale? And a fascinating thought experiment for sure.
Food for thought. Okay, so we've covered token economies and group contingencies. That brings us to our final system, contingency contracts. What are those all about?
Contingency contracts are all about clarity, transparency, and, most importantly, agreement.
So it's like a formal agreement between two or more parties that lays out exactly what's expected of each person and what the consequences will be, both positive and negative, depending on whether they hold up their end of the bargain.
Exactly. It's like a personalized roadmap for behavior change.
And because it's all written down, there's no room for misinterpretation or, I forgot, excuses, right?
Exactly. It's all about accountability. And the best part is that contingency contracts can be used in so many different contexts.
Like, give me some examples. Where would you typically see these contracts being used?
Oh, you see them everywhere. In classrooms, homes, workplaces, therapy settings, you name it.
Okay, so it's not just for kids with behavioral issues. It's for anyone who's trying to make a change, whether it's sticking to a diet, quitting smoking, or even just being more punctual.
You got it. And they can be especially effective when there's a clear power dynamic involved, like between a parent and child or a therapist and client.
Makes sense. Okay, so what are the key ingredients of a well-crafted contingency contract? Like, what do you absolutely have to include to make sure it works?
Well, first things first, you got to make sure the task is crystal clear. We're talking who, what, when, where, and how. No room for ambiguity.
Okay, so no vague goals like be nicer or try harder.
Exactly. We need specifics. Then you've got to figure out how you're going to measure progress. Is it a simple checklist, a point system, or some other tracking method?
Got to keep everyone honest. What about rewards? Do those work the same way as in token economies?
Absolutely. The same principles apply. The rewards need to be motivating and tailored to the individual's preferences. And don't forget about a task record. Having a visual representation of the agreement and the progress being made can be incredibly helpful.
It's like a motivational poster, but instead of cheesy slogans, it's your own personal contract with yourself. I love it. But what happens when someone just flat out refuses to sign on the dotted line?
That's where those good old-fashioned communication and negotiation skills come into play. Remember, contingency contracts should always be a collaborative effort, not a dictatorship.
Right. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone involved, not about forcing someone into something they're not comfortable with.
Exactly. And sometimes it might mean exploring alternative approaches, like modeling or even a parent contract.
A parent contract. And that's a new one. Tell me more about that.
So instead of the parent setting all the terms, The child gets to create a contract for the parent.
Oh, love that. Talk about turning the tables.
Yeah.
So the child gets to decide on a behavior they'd like to see their parent change and what the reward will be if the parent successfully makes that change.
Precisely. It's a fun and empowering way to teach kids about fairness, negotiation, and the importance of following through on their commitments.
That is brilliant. And it's a great reminder that even though we've been talking about these systems in the context of behavior change, they're really just tools for communication and collaboration.
100%. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? Finding ways to work together to create positive change both in ourselves and in the world around us.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored token economies, group contingencies, contingency contracts, and even self-contracts, all backed by fascinating research and real-world examples.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole universe of information out there for those who are eager to dive even deeper into the science of behavior change.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired and ready to put this knowledge into action, because let's be real, information is only powerful if you actually use it. What's one small step they can take today?
Start by asking yourself, which of these systems resonated with me the most? And then think about where in your own life you could experiment with these strategies. Maybe it's creating a simple reward chart for your kids, trying out a new teamwork challenge at work, or even just setting a personal goal and writing yourself a contract to stay accountable. The key is to find what works for you and your unique circumstances.
I love that. Start small, experiment, and don't be afraid to make adjustments along the way.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, behavior change is a journey, not a destination.
And the most important thing is to keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to be the best version of ourselves.